really know even how to start looking for another job. But then something very interesting happened. A message came to me that Justice Brandeis wanted to talk to me about taking a job as secretary to Edmund I. Kaufman, who was about to be elected as the president of the Zionist Organization of America. But there's so much history connected with that election. For as many years as I can, or most people could remember, the Zionist Organization of America was led by what was called the Lipsky group. He was the sage, he was the philosopher, he was the man of wisdom, and a political specialist the like of which there wasn't anywhere. And he was brilliant. And he had many Hasidim who sat at his feet. I don't know whether you know anything about the place called the Tiptoe Inn in New York. That was on 86th and Broadway. It was a restaurant. And at 10 o'clock every night, at a table reserved for this group, people would assemble after their meetings and everything, and sit around at that table and listen to the wisdom of Louis Lipsky as he analyzed the political events of the day, especially about Palestine and the problems and all of that. And because of my relationship to Weisskopf, who was one of Lipsky's Hasidim, I came to that table from time to time and sat and listened to it. So I guess I could have been called one of the Lipsky followers. So here was a job offered to me with the group that aimed to oust the Lipsky crowd from leadership.
What a delicate position.
And the reason that Brandeis and Solomon Goldman and Stephen Wise, those are the ones that I remember chiefly, the reason they wanted to do it was because they said this was a moment when it required something other than the old-time Zionists. This was a moment when there had to be somebody that had some relationship to the White House.
And this
somebody
other,
who
this
had some
Edward
influence.
Cohen.
And Edmund I. Kaufman,
Edmund Kaufman.
he knew very little about the Zionist movement as such, but he did have a telephonic relationship with the vice president, and he was a rich man, and he had a broad relationship with friends around the country who had never been in the Zionist movement. I think for the most part they were not necessarily anti-Zionists, but they were non-Zionists. And so this crowd, let's call it the Brandeis group, decided this was the time for change. So my dilemma, how can I tell Meyer Weisskopf, my boss, that I am switching over to the group that was going to oust the Lipsky crowd? And I tell you, I had some sleepless nights coping with that situation. But I finally did take the job. And it's very true that Mr. Kaufman had he could dial, I think it's Vice President Barkley, he could dial him anytime he wanted to for information or to relay information. And it is true that Edmund Kaufman, he traveled around the country, and the meetings were chiefly with these non-Zionists who didn't care anything about the politics involved at all. He would just say to them, I need your help.
Would you say that was his strength, Nell? Was this ability
at that moment it was important. And he did bring in part of my job, at the request of Brandeis, was when we were in the Washington area that I was to report to Justice Brandeis about the status of the Zionist organization. He wanted to know each time how many new members, where they came from, as much about their background as possible. He wanted to know about the meetings that had been scheduled. And my job was to schedule these meetings around the country and to cope with the antagonism of the old Zionist crowd.
So you were a good person because you knew
Well,
some of the old and you...
But it took its toll on my innards. And
So Brandeis was really this interested in the workings of the Zionist movement?
I didn't know
In the inner, day-to-day operational?
I knew he was a Zionist because in our speeches, Junior Hadassah movement, we always used to counter the argument that it's you can't have a double allegiance. So we always said double allegiance. If Justice Brandeis, one of the greatest Jewish Americans in the country, if he could be a Zionist and work for Palestine, don't you accuse any of us of being having a double allegiance.
Can I just ask for a minute in just a slightly
Sure.
other direction? What was the background of your relationship with Justice Brandeis? Was this the first time you were...
No, as you recall that I had told you that when we were having a problem in Junior Hadassah, the communists had moved into the American Youth Congress, and since I knew he was interested in Palestine and in Zionism, I had the nerve to write him and ask him what he thought about.
So that's how you first met him?
That was my first.
And that's how you discovered he was really much more interested than...
Yes, that's right. And that's when he got the idea that I would be a good person, and I was available at the time to take this job. Now, that was...
Give yourself a lot of credit now for having brought all that together.
There's a lot of interesting stuff. This man Kaufman had a summer place in Atlantic City. His winter place, he was the head of a group that owned the Hollywood Beach Hotel in Hollywood, Florida, which was the snazziest hotel in Florida at that time. And so we'd go from Washington to Atlantic City to the Hollywood Beach.
And you went with?
Oh yeah, sure, because
that's where it was.
In Florida you could arrange a lot of meetings.
That's right.
But at some point, trying to do all these things was getting the best of me, and I went to Brandeis and I said I really thought that I couldn't finish out the year, and he appealed to me to hold on, and that Ed Kaufman was not going to stay any more than a year. But
you were needed.
Going very well.
Wow.
So
you finished up the year.
That's what it went through the year, and it
so
was
this is 40 to 41?
That was 40, 41.
You said that June and 40 the exhibit closed. So
yeah, right.
into 41.